Well, welcome, Mike Collins. Thanks for being here.
My absolute pleasure.
You've had a long, illustrious career as a cartoonist and in comic books. So, where did it all start? Presumably, it was from a love of comics originally.
Oh, absolutely. I grew up reading Beano and the Dandy and back then the Sparky.
Hmm.
So, and it just sort of never occurred to me that I couldn't do that for a living. So I used to do when I was a little kid, I did my own little comics, but quite often what I'd do with them is I'd fill exercise books up, but I would do like 1 or 2 page stories and I would sign each page with a different name
Oh,
because
I see.
all the comics I read, I would, things like Looking and what have you. There was always different people working on different strips. So I thought, oh, do you have to do them all and just pretend to be different people?
So, did you originally just copy the style of art from the comics you were reading?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's various artist stuff. I mean, so the big one for me was the Sparky rather than being in the
Yeah,
Dandy. It just seemed a little bit edgier.
yeah.
And there are a few strips in there. There was I Spy was one I absolutely adored. There's
Hmm.
something about the kinetic artwork on that one that just I just went for.
Right.
Um, some of the other stuff I thought was a bit, oh, it's all right. But I think it was I Spy was one that just made me think, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
This looks like a job.
Well, you originally trained to be a lawyer, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, what had happened was that growing up, my parents had sort of said that, growing up in West Bromwich as well, to emphasise this, that there's no way I could actually do anything as bizarre an outre as being a comic book artist or a cartoonist.
Hmm.
And that if I wanted to do that, maybe do that later on,
Yeah.
but in the meantime, get a proper job. So I actually went to university and studied law for a couple of years. And the university I went to is Brunel in West London, and
Yeah.
the good thing about the Brunel University courses, certainly at that time, is they're all thin sandwich. So I'd spend 6 months in university, 6 months out working, and I
Hmm.
think it was 6 months working for a firm of solicitors and the 6 months working for the magistrates court down in the south of England that convinced me that I really wasn't cut out for the law, and really that mental image I have of being like a barrister who drew Spider-Man on the side, it's like, well, maybe just cut out the barrister bit and just draw Spider-Man.
So, yeah, you said Spider-Man. Was that your big superhero that you preferred to draw or wanted to draw?
Oh yeah, growing up as hang on, I'm getting zoom thing there. Growing up as a spotty kid and a specky kid, Peter
Hmm.
Parker was definitely my idol. Yeah, because he was a kid that was always getting picked on at school, and it was just like he had this secret power, which is, I mean, he could swing between buildings on webs, and I could draw things. I thought, well, maybe that's my thing. The drawing is my little secret ability.
So, how did your big break into comics?
It was kind of weird. I've been working. So while I was at university, and I was still
Yeah.
doing law and transitioning out of law. I actually switched my major to politics on the basis
Oh.
that that was a much easier thing to do because you do politics, you just have an opinion. So I had
Hmm.
loads of them. um, so I was doing little comic strips for the college newspaper. I was designing T-shirts for people, and so I was getting to learn how to draw for production, which I think is something that you don't necessarily get taught at art school.
Hmm.
All the things about you're taught to do very pretty artwork because the art you're doing is a finished piece. Whereas if, as you know, if you were working in newspapers or comics or whatever, the artwork is only part of the process. The finished piece is the piece that comes out in print.
Yeah.
So that was a valuable learning experience. And I was also doing fanzine work, and my fanzine stuff
Hmm.
got spotted by Alan Moore of all people.
Ah.
And Alan sort of then championed me and my working partner at the time, Mark Farmer, into getting work with Marvel UK.
Hmm.
And because of Alan, we sort of broke that catch-22 that nobody will hire you till somebody's hired you.
Yeah.
And once we got that in there, it was like, I like to say the world was our oyster, but it did take a little while still. My really big break, actually, funnily enough, was the mid 80s which is when I was starting, sort of 1984, 1985. And let's not think about how long ago that was.
Hmm.
Um, uh, they had all the toy tie-in comics came out.
Mm.
And what the comics companies needed was warm bodies that could hold a pencil. So I was just lucky to be there at the right time for that.
Yeah.
So I kind of learnt on the job drawing Transformers and Zoids and writing things like Thundercats and He-Man.
Right.
So it was quite an intense learning experience, and it was great. I mean, so that was me starting off. Marvel UK was my home, and they sort of they were great because I would turn the stuff in. I'm sure some of it really was not that great, but I did have one editor when I asked about the artwork. He said it had a really good postcode on it. As a job, it's just like it got in on the right time, the right date. That's all we wanted. It's full pages.
So, to the layman like myself, right? So I've always wondered this. So, when you get a comic strip to draw, what's the process? So, presumably, you get a script
Yeah,
and you get told how much space you've got in terms of pages. I take it.
yeah. I mean, funnily enough, when I started working with Marvel UK in 2000 AD, quite often the writers there would actually give you, they'd tell you, this is a 5-page comic strip. Here are
Mm.
30 frames to draw. It was only sort of after a while when they started going for the American model, which was to do it as page by page. So page one, 6 panels, page two, 5 panels, whatever. So it was quite nice at the start where you could actually sort of have a bit more freedom. So if you wanted to do a really big picture somewhere down the line, then you could actually pace it better. So you'd have more frames to start with, maybe a page with 2 or 3 frames on. So that looked really expressive. And then
Mm.
after that, you'd fill the pages up a bit more with the frames that you should have had in the earlier pages.
Right.
If you look at a lot of comics artwork from that time, a lot of 2000 AD stuff from the early through mid 80s, the artists were given a lot of freedom in the way they'd sort of lay things out.
Yeah.
So, whereas these days you're just told this is page one, this is frames 1 to 4, this is, and so you sort of it's a bit more prescribed, and you've actually sort of got to negotiate with the editor and the writer if you want to do something big and flashy.
I see. Okay. Presumably, as well, you need to plan the size of the frame depending on how much dialogue as well
Oh,
for the
oh
speech
yeah,
bubbles. Yeah.
yeah. You've always got to have that as part of your planning because it's too easy to sort of come up with a really good image and then realize, oh, there's no room for anybody to talk here now. And so you get like you get a shot of Judge Dredd and you get a really nice face of Judge Dredd, and when it sees print, half of Dredd's eyes and nose are covered up with a word balloon. So you've actually sort of got it in your head, so thinking about roughly a third of each frame is going to be the dialogue. So you design the frames according to that.
Right.
And
Okay.
it's a knack. You just pick it up after a while. I
Yeah.
mean, I still cock it up every so often,
Yeah.
and I get letters complaining. So, I don't have enough space for this.
So when you're drawing things for like, because you've done a lot of things, haven't you? So let's say franchises like Transformers,
Yeah,
Doctor Who, that sort of thing. When you're drawing those, how much input do the like BBC or the toy manufacturers have over the comic? Do they provide scripts or do they have to okay things?
yeah. Everything has to be passed by the licensor.
Yeah,
So which is fair enough because it's their property. They want the
yeah,
best version of their character out there, and they don't want people messing it up.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm always very conscious that whatever I'm doing has got to suit the thing. So I'll try, like on the Action Force comic, the GI Joe comic, I'd every so often try and sneak something through, something silly, and they just go, no, not having that.
So do you get provided with a sort of a design Bible that you got to stick to?
Oh yeah, well, interestingly, Transformers. When that started in UK comics, they'd ran the first few issues of the American comic, and then they'd sort of got initially John Ridgway, and then I took over from John on it, and they hadn't provided any proper reference. So,
Yeah,
following on from John's lead, I was just drawing the toys as the toys looked,
yeah,
which is why the early Transformer comics were very different from what came later. And after I've been doing it for a while, I went over to America to visit Marvel offices. And while I was there, the editor Bob Adainsky had sort of come up to me and went, "Like, you're working on the Transformers comic back in the UK. Take this back with you and hand it to the office. This is how the thing should look." So he gave me this. It's like Moses going to visit the mountain and coming down with the tablets, this huge Bible of how everything was meant to be done. So the,
um,
so the next week I went back into Marvel UK offices and sort of handed over. Said, "Bob says draw like this." So but it was fantastic because they had, I mean, with Transformers particularly, they'd worked out, and I think it was probably for the animation side of things as well. They'd
yeah.
worked out turnarounds of all the characters and the side relations and all this. So it was all there in this thing. There was like several hundred pages. luckily it was sort of a clip out, so you could photocopy bits and pieces. So you always had good reference. But
Right.
yeah, so yeah, you do have to follow that. And like on Doctor Who, you've got to prove up front that you can draw the characters. So
Yeah.
like when the TV show came back and I was drawing the Doctor Who strip, every time there's a new Doctor, a new companion, I basically have to audition for my job again
Right.
by drawing the next Doctor or drawing the next companion. So the actors were happy, well, as much as anything else, their agents were happy.
Right.
Because that's a big part of it. Because I think I found with a couple of things where it hasn't even got as far as the actor. It's just been the agents going, oh,
Yeah.
he's not going to like that, or that's more like it.
Well,
I go on.
I was going to say, yeah, another aspect of the job obviously is character drawing. Sorry, the drawing bodies and people and that sort of thing. Figure drawing, that's the word I'm looking for.
There you go. Yeah.
I'm woolly headed today. I'm very sorry. So did you have to go to like live classes and stuff like that to learn how to draw people really well, or did it just come from the comics?
Oh, I've done live classes off and on over the years. Absolutely, it's a real help.
Yeah.
Um, I've also got a lot of action figures. I mean, Gary Leach, who was the major artist that sort of helped me when I was starting out, basically said, "What you need is an action man." Because those little wooden figures you get, they're fine, but they're not great for figure work and stuff. But an
Yeah.
action man is really well articulated. Use him. So yeah, for several years, Action Man was my reference. If you think about it, if you're going to get somebody to pose for you for something like Spider-Man or Superman, you can't actually get a person to leap between buildings or fly
Mm.
into the sky, but you can hold an Action Man in your left hand while you're drawing with your right hand, or take a
Okay.
photograph of him. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can get all the foreshortening sorted out up front. So
Yeah. It must be
yeah,
quite
I
difficult.
always use reference. Yeah.
It must be quite difficult because in these like Marvel and DC and that sort of thing, there's always very extreme perspectives, isn't there? To make things look quite action packed. Was that quite difficult to get your head around when you first started doing it to get used to that?
Uh, do you know what it was actually? Because
Yeah,
I think because I'd sort of drawn fairly naturalistically, I
yeah,
sort of had to get pushed by if I was one writer I was working with Steve Moore that wrote so many comics back when I started, and Steve basically said, you've got to show the dog the rabbit. You've got to have something in that shot that just pulls you into that picture that drags you along.
yeah,
You've got to you've got to make it feel like you're looking at a still image, but you're seeing a moving image.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
got to be something in that picture that your head is going to actually fill in gaps so that you see, like, so when you see Spider-Man swing between buildings,
mm,
if you've got a sort of depth of perspective shot, you've got that sense of Spider-Man swinging towards you or swinging over you.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's all these little tricks that you pick up.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
Marvel was your first office job.
yeah.
What was your favorite character? You get that asked this all the time, but what was your favorite character to draw?
Ooh, Marvel is probably Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Um, and oddly, I've drawn Spider-Man for the British comics. I've drawn it for the French comics. I've never drawn it for the American comics. I've done
Wow.
loads of stuff for American, but Spider-Man is. There's a few times where I've got very close to drawing the American Spider-Man comic, but it hasn't panned out. Something else has happened instead.
Hmm.
I think my favorite character to draw overall is Judge Dredd.
Right.
He's got such a remarkable costume, and the nice thing about the Judge Dredd strip is it can be any kind of story.
Yeah.
So, like one issue you can be drawing a police procedural, the next one it's some darkly satirical thing, the next one can be a horror story, the next one laugh out loud farce.
Yeah.
So I love the flexibility of that,
Yeah.
and you get to draw, and you draw it slightly more outrageously as well. It's larger than life stuff.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
What was the most difficult one to draw?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. Um, ooh, there's been a few times I've worked on strips where the scripts haven't been that great,
Yeah.
and that's been difficult. It's having to rouse yourself to draw something dynamic out of something that isn't dynamic.
Right.
I
Yeah.
did I did an issue of Batman. So when they phoned me up and said, "Do you want to draw an issue of Batman?" I was like, "Yeah, I want to draw Batman. Absolutely, I want to draw Batman. Childhood dream come true. Playing with
Hmm.
your childhood toys." And they sent me the script through, and it was a 22-page story
Hmm.
in which 15 or 16 of the pages were two police officers interrogating a suspect in one of those homicide life on the street square interrogation rooms with just
Yeah. Yeah.
piles on the wall, table in the middle, and a couple of chairs.
Right.
And it's just like, oh my God. I mean, there was a couple of pages with Batman which I just went mad on, with all
Yeah.
sorts of swooping angles and big shots and what have you. But
Yeah.
yeah, making that work was 3 times the work, it has to be said, because
Hmm.
trying to make 3 people in a room talking interesting is a challenge. I might have had a little cry when I read the script first time.
Do you have any input with the script at all? I mean, do you ever get situations where you just say, "Look, I cannot sort of fit this amount of text in there. Is it, can we change the wording or something like that?" Any time that's
Every so
happened?
often, and if you're working on a script regularly and you're working with a writer, you can have a bit of to-ing and fro-ing on stuff.
Yeah.
You say, oh, a bit more of this, a bit less of that, or I'm having a couple of times I've had to move frames onto the next page, sort of thing, because there isn't enough room to tell the story on that page. But I'll
Right.
always go to the writer first and say, "Are you fine with me doing this? Because it's changed the break where you've put the break in."
Yeah.
And as long as they're happy with it, I will play with things a bit. I did interesting. I did a book recently for an American publisher, and it was a proper publisher, not a comics publisher,
Yeah.
and they'd not done a graphic novel before, and so they were handing me this script where every frame, and it was an office environment where every frame was just completely prescribed, what was happening in each shot, and
Mm.
they kept moving who was speaking first in the shot around, and any comics letter will tell you that's a nightmare, because if you've got 3 or 4 people in an office talking and it's a different person speaking first, you've got to change things around and make things work. So what I said to them was, look, you know what's going to be happening on each page, and you know
Mm.
the dialogue that's going to be on each page. If at the top of the page you tell me you want these things to happen on the page, and this is the dialogue, I will then break it down into frames.
Right.
And so just trust me, because I'm say doing this 40 years. Trust me with the storytelling. I will get the information you want across, and I'll do it in a way that doesn't clutter, doesn't make the letterer cry, have the tails crossing over in the pictures, because it's the only way to do it. So I would do that, and quite often, what I found with doing that is I put more frames on the page than they would,
Yeah.
because there's certain things, like certain beats in a script, where actually it's great if you just have this sort of this one sentence isolated with a headshot, because it makes it really impactful.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
if you're seeing it on TV, you zoom in on somebody's face and they said something significant. Whereas when they were plotting it originally, you'd have like 4 or 5 people in the same panel talking,
Mm.
and that kills the drama, that kills the flow of it as well.
Yeah.
There's no sort of movement. Again, it's that thing about movement. And Spider-Man swinging through buildings, or 3 people sitting around a table talking.
Yeah.
It's all about the movement,
Mm.
about that sense that you want the whole thing to be kinetic and dynamic.
Yeah.
Even if they're discussing just spreadsheets in an office.
Right. Well, you said you worked for 2000 AD. So why
Yeah.
did you? What made you leave Marvel then to go to 2000 AD?
Oh, I always wanted to work for 2000 AD.
Yeah.
Right from when I was at school, reading 2000 AD, and actually Star-Lord was the one I read first, and then they got merged with 2000 AD, so that's what took me over to that. Um, I just love the characters. I love the sort of anarchic nature of the magazine. I
Mm.
love the artwork. I mean, that when 2000 AD started, they had the cream of British comics artists working for it and doing amazing artwork that still holds up today. You look at that stuff now, and it's just what Brian
Mm.
Bolland was doing, what Kev O'Neill was doing, what Mike McMahon was doing, what Dave Gibbons was doing. It's just solid, classic, but brilliant British comics artwork. It's absolutely fantastic stuff. And I was like, I'm never going to be that good, but I'm going to try.
What was the culture like at 2000 AD? With it being a British company, was it a lot different to Marvel?
Yeah. Uh, there's a lot more freedom with 2000 AD, and that's what quite impressed me.
Yeah.
If you do Marvel comics, or in fact, if you do work for DC Thompson as well, for the most part, they want to see your roughs, they want to see your pencils, they want to see your inks. They
Right.
want every stage approval, which is fine, because it's a sequence that's got to be done, and quite often one person's laying it out, one person's penciling it, one person's person is inking it.
Yeah.
So actually, it's a machine.
Yeah.
Um, but 2000 AD, they give you the script and they just send you away to draw it, and you bring the pages in.
Ah,
They would
okay.
trust you to get that sorted, to get that storytelling sorted,
Yeah.
and that sense of liberty, that sense of space is brilliant.
Yeah.
Creatively, it's great,
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, I've
and
always
it's
loved that.
it's it's still the case today, because I still do work for 2000 AD off and on when I can, because I
Yeah.
still kind of think that as my home. So
Yeah, I love all the anti-hero stuff as well. I love all the characters in 2000 AD.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
because I drew Judge Dredd, I drew Sláine, I drew Rogue Trooper.
yeah.
So they're all sort of loners that sort of, well, even though Dredd's one of the judges, he's definitely on his own in the judges.
Oh,
He's
absolutely.
definitely out there, yeah. So
Did you see the two films? There was the Stallone film, wasn't there, and the more
yeah.
recent one as well. What did you think of them? Start interest.
The Stallone film is absolutely brilliant for the first 20 minutes. It is absolutely the Dredd film I wanted. And then he takes his helmet off and starts making jokes. And I was like, you've killed it. Funnily, if the Carl Urban one I watched last night,
Oh, right.
because I haven't watched it for ages, I thought, it's just there. I'm just going to have it on the background and working. And
Mm,
I'd forgotten just how brilliant it is because it captures that sort of feel of the desperation of Mega City 1. And Carl Urban never takes his helmet off.
yeah, golden rule.
Yep.
Well, after that, you went to work for DC, didn't you, in America?
Yeah.
So what took you over there then? Did you just fancy working abroad?
Oh, I always fancied working for the American companies. That was
Yeah.
always on my sort of tick list. But the way I got it was most bizarre. Through Steve Moore, I mentioned earlier,
Mm,
I got to work on a strip called Laser Razor and Press Button, which Steve Dillon used to draw.
yeah.
And Steve had been hired away by the Americans, lured away by cheap nylons and bubblegum. And so they needed something to fill in. And Steve, who was the writer on it, so said, "Well, do you want to try it out?" And I did it for a few issues. Really
Mm,
enjoyed doing it. It's a really anarchic, very British. Didn't think Americans would sort of go for it at all. But I gone to one of the London comic conventions, one of the early UCACs, and
mm,
one of the things that Frank Plowright that run those shows did, which I thought was really nice, was at the start of every show on the Friday afternoon, he would get all the artists and writers to come up on stage,
mm.
so the people at the show could see who they were and so could catch up with them later on during the show, so meet up with them. And so I was waiting in line patiently to go up on stage, and there was this American lady in front of me. It was fabulous plastic jewelry. And she sort of turned around and says, "Oh, hello, how are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, hi." I said, "What do you do?" I said, "I draw lasers and press button." And she said, "Oh, I love that strip." And I thought, "Have
Mm.
she seen this strip?" Because it's such a weird British strip. And she said, "Do you want to work for me?" I went, "Maybe, yeah, all right." She said, "I'm Jeanette Kahn. I'm the editor-in-chief of DC Comics." I went, "Yes, then, yes, please." So you see, standing in queues can be good. But yeah, so after that, I got sort of hired away, as did a lot of the British artists I mentioned earlier, to work
Mm,
for American comics. So we were the British brain drain. And I sort of worked out in American comics for a good 10, 15 years, working with
yeah,
Marvel and DC.
yeah.
Um, so I get to draw all sorts of things. So I drew the X-Men for Marvel. I drew the Flash and Teen Titans, Superman and Wonder Woman, and Batman at one point, I said.
Mm,
Um, so I got to draw. So I never did long runs on any of these books, but I got to draw a lot of them. So if you that little tick list you have as a kid,
mm.
I got a lot of those ticked off. Yeah.
What was it like living in America? I mean, I've lived in America. I lived there for 4 years. How did
Oh,
you? What was a
well,
big difference for you?
I didn't live out there. I almost did a couple of times,
Oh, I
but
see. Sorry. Yeah.
yeah. So the joys of Federal Express.
Okay.
FedEx van would back its way down my street, or when I had a studio in town, would coming to the studio in town, and
Yeah.
just take my artwork away and hand me a check, which was great.
Ah, I mean, sorry, this is a personal thing, but so what was the pay like?
Good.
Was it good?
Yeah, I mean the problem is it's still the same today.
Yeah. Oh, I
It's
see.
the rates have not gone up. So and the time I was working in American comics as well there was quite decent royalties on stuff.
Ah, okay.
So it was a decent page rate, and then a couple of months later, when the book's gone off sale, you get a chunk of money through on top of that.
Ah, okay.
So it was a good time to be working in American comics.
Yeah. You've done a lot of TV and film stuff as well.
Yeah,
So the other word I couldn't remember a few minutes ago was storyboarding.
yeah.
So you've done a lot of that. So do you want to tell us what that is?
Uh, so storyboarding is basically doing comic strips for directors.
Right.
So that's the easiest way of looking at it. I started off working in animation in the mid '90s, so the American stuff started to dry up a bit,
Yeah.
and so there's still bits of it coming through. There wasn't enough, and at the time I was renting space in an animation company,
Hmm.
and I'd looked at storyboards and thought, you know what, animation storyboards look a lot like comic strips. I'm sure I can just transition over without any problems. Oh boy, no. What I found was it's almost the equivalent of being able to speak English in London and being able to speak English in Glasgow.
Right.
You see, there are idiomatic things, there are grammatical things that are very, very different.
Right.
And if you've so learned to draw comics, that's you living in Glasgow. And you come down to London and start talking as you do in Glasgow, people don't understand what you've done.
Right. Right.
There's various things about it that it took me a while to sort of click onto. When you draw comics, you can draw your frames any size on the page.
Yeah.
When you're working in TV or movies, that screen does not change shape. You've got to make your image work within that space. You've also got to make your images flow from one frame to the next. Because there's nothing worse than if you watch a film and suddenly characters just jar, they jump around the frames. You've always got to think of that continuous process.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a different grammar. So after a while, I sort of got into it, and I worked in storyboarding animation, particularly preschool animation, which there's a lot, because I live in Cardiff, and there's a lot of preschool animation based here, quite a lot of it in the Welsh language. So I worked in that for a good 10 years, doing various things. Still doing comics as well on the off times, but animation storyboarding was definitely my day job for quite a while. Outside of Wales, I was on the Horrid Henry TV show for about 3 years.
Okay.
Getting to really hate Horrid Henry. Little git, His parents were worse, but there you go. But that was quite interesting, seeing your artwork then turning up on screen. One of the advantages about doing storyboarding coming out of a comics background, particularly for animation, is that we have to learn about perspective and how things work in a frame and how things work within a sequence. Whereas quite a lot of people that I work with in animation came through animation and didn't have that sort of background.
Yeah.
So quite often, for quite a while, I would have assistants. So I do all the storytelling, I do all the layouts, and I get them to work on model. And every so often I noticed that what they're doing is they were messing up the perspective because they hadn't been taught that.
Yeah.
So I basically have to come through and go, no, this is close, this is far away, big and little. The Father Ted joke. Apparently, funny if it was on Horrid Henry, I was talking to one of the directors, and they said, they'd had a problem with some animators where they draw stuff and they wouldn't think about it. It would then go to China to be animated, and the Chinese animators would just look at this artwork and they'd work this perspective out. And so, like in Horrid Henry's kitchen, they would draw this table that was 10 feet tall because that's what was on the storyboards. It's worked out well. I'm looking at that in that relation to that, so that must be that big. So, so working everything out in perspective was a really good thing to learn.
Yeah. But you worked on things like The Witcher, haven't you, as well?
Yeah. I always wanted to go into live action boarding. That was my thing.
Yeah.
And sort of late 90s, early 2000s, I started doing bits and pieces for commercials and for small films. So there was like my first sort of break in that regard was there was a series of small films that had been done for a competition here in Cardiff for Flick, which is a local screen company. And I got to work on these like 4 or 5 minute films. And so again, it was a learning experience because I was coming out of animation thinking, I know how to do all this, but there's all these different camera angles and things you could do and couldn't do in live action, and learning that. So because of doing that, I started doing commercials.
Yeah.
So I did a fair few commercials, and then I've been working on, of all things, a Lifebuoy soap advert for India.
Oh, right. Is that still going?
Yeah, well, in India it is.
Yeah.
So I'd done this commercial, and a mate of mine, Andrew Wildman, who was the storyboard artist on Doctor Who at the time,
Yeah.
phoned me up and said, I've got a bit of a dilemma. I went, okay. He said, I've been offered the next series of Doctor Who, but I've also been offered a film with Charlize Theron in it. And do you want to do Doctor Who? And luckily at the time, my studio was literally walking distance from the BBC studios down in Cardiff Bay.
Yeah.
So Andrew sort of introduced us. I went down there, showed my work, and most of my boards off at that time were animation boards. But I had this Lifebuoy soap advert,
Right.
so I was able to show I've got boards with real people in them rather than Horrid Henry. And I showed them there, and they was like, right, well, you're hired. I said, oh, that's really good. He said, well, so what we like about you, Mike, is you're nearby, you're on time, and you're cheap. And I thought, do you know what? I'll have that.
Oh, so for the
So
live action, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, but because I worked on Doctor Who, because
Yeah.
Doctor Who has a huge turnover of directors, so like quite often directors will do only like 2 episodes or 3 episodes at the most, and then go into other shows. There's various directors I work with that obviously like what I did. So when they went on to another show, like for instance The Witcher or
Hmm.
Sherlock, um, they would ask me back to work with them again. So that's how I sort of got known in various production offices. So
Right.
so that's quite nice. It's all word of mouth stuff, and obviously, being
Yeah.
cheap and on time, business.
So with the live action stuff, then, do you because obviously you can't create the scene, it's actually based on they're filming somewhere real, aren't they, basically? So do you
Yeah.
get taken to the set beforehand or the locations, or do they just describe it to you? What happens?
I Whenever you go around TV studios or film
Yeah.
studios, there's always signs up saying no photography allowed. That doesn't include me. I'm
Right.
allowed to photograph, and quite often we have Google SketchUp models of the sets.
Hmm.
So if they're building like a Doctor Who corridor, for instance, and there are so many corridors in Doctor Who, they'll give me access to the models so I can work out from the models how everything fits together. Doctor's running down here, and then we move the camera to the end of this corridor, and they run down the other way, so it looks like they've run down a really long corridor and turned a corner. In
I
fact, it's just
see.
the same corridor they've run down twice.
Yeah.
Um, and I'll go on set and, as I sort of work out how things fit together and what have you. It's really useful going on set. The only time I've not been allowed to photograph was on the last series of Doctor Who, where they didn't want any images of the new TARDIS getting out.
Okay.
And I sort of argued the case that, well, it'd be really useful for me if I had photographs. I went, no, go visit the set,
Mm.
look at it, wander around it, then go back to the production office and sketch what you've seen, but no photographs.
Right.
So it was that sort of like, the artistic discipline of remembering what you've seen and drawing it on the spot then. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's a huge set as well, that Doctor. It's the size of a cathedral. I don't think
Really.
you fully appreciate it watching on TV, just how big it is.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary. Yeah. But generally, if I get a chance to visit the set, I will do,
Yeah.
and hopefully take photographs. Um, there was at one point where I think it was Capaldi's second season where he enters into a courtyard of a castle on the back of a Sherman tank, and they'd built this cardboard model of the castle set because they hadn't
Hmm.
quite because I think some of it was on location, some of it was going to be built. So we had the whole thing. So we worked out where the camera's going to fit and all that, and we had this little Sherman tank toy.
Mm.
So there's me and the director sort of leaning over this, putting this little tank on, boom, 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 comes along here and comes in the middle here, and somebody walked past the office door, looking in at us, and we go, "We're working, playing with little tanks and things." Yes, it's a good job. Yeah, but yeah,
So,
so it's yeah.
go on.
I was going to say it's great having that sort of reference. The
Yeah.
only time I got into trouble, and again I was actually in the first Peter Capaldi season.
Mm.
I've been storyboarding one of the stories, and they called me into the office, and I was like, "Oh, hello, I've done something wrong here. I'm going to get railed for something. I don't know what it is." And I said, "Sit down, Mike." And the producer and the director were sitting opposite me and said, "Right, we've got a problem." I go, "Oh, here we go. They're gonna, I'm gone. Been a lovely dream. It's all gonna go away."
Mm.
And they said, "It's about your boards on this latest episode." And they go, "Oh, I've blown it." They said, "We've got this sequence where this undersea base is flooding,
Mm.
and you've drawn these boards where the door is about to slam shut, and the doctor's basically got to dive through this door before the door shuts, otherwise he's going to drown." I went,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I boarded all that." And they said, "Yeah, you have, but the angles you've used, we can see, or we have to see the doctor's face."
Mm.
And I said, "You've got to appreciate that Peter is an older actor, and if he did what you've drawn here," and said, "It's fine when you do the comic strip. You
Yeah.
can do that on the comic strip, but on this sequence here, we can't have it.
Yeah.
Go back, reframe the shots so we can get the stunt doctor in there, so we don't see his face." So basically, it's like reframe that. And as leaving the office, they said, we've got a new rule for you, Michael. And I said, what's that? Don't break Peter. So, right, got that now. Yep.
Are there any things that, because I used to work as an artist myself, but in computer games, and the two things I cannot draw to save my life is bicycles and horses. I don't know why, I just can't draw those two things.
Yeah.
Is there anything
Well,
you
these
can't?
days, bicycles. Um, these days, God bless Google SketchUp,
Yeah,
because somebody out there has built a 3D model of a bicycle.
right.
And you can sort of have it on your computer and sort of spin it around so you get the angle you want. So when you're drawing it, you can actually sort of get the perspective right on it.
Yeah.
So that's brilliant. Horses, I've got quite a few books on horses. Funny enough, about, oh, good Lord, it's probably nearly 20 years ago. Oh dear. I did an adaptation of A Christmas Carol
Yeah.
for classical comics. And there was a sequence I'd worked out where you've got this horse and trap coming towards you. And I roughed it all out and I could not find the right reference. Because, go on the internet, look for it, couldn't get the shot I wanted. And me and a few friends had gone over to Bruges
Hmm.
for a pre-Christmas thing. And in Bruges, centre of Bruges, you're not allowed to drive. It's, the only things that allow the centre of Bruges are horses and carriages.
Right.
And I saw this horse and carriage coming down the road. I thought, I've got it. I've got my shot. So I ran in front of this horse and carriage, snapped, and then jumped out the way as the horses went by. But it's a look at that in the comic thing. I could have died doing that. That was a really stupid thing to do.
How do, how,
Artists and their art, yeah.
how do you think comics have changed since when you first started to sort of today?
What's interesting now is that the art, I was going to say that it's got better in terms of quality of reproduction, but funnily enough, in the 60s,
Yeah.
so before I was old enough to be appreciating this, with things like the Eagle and Look and Learn and all this, they actually had really good reproduction of artwork.
Yeah.
There's a beautifully done reproduction. You look at that sort of full color artwork around at the time, it was magnificent. It looked gorgeous on the page. During the 70s and the 80s, when I was reading comics, and into the 90s, the late 80s and 90s when I was drawing them, the quality of printing just gone down and down and down, and you actually sort of
Mm.
you could bodge things through because you knew it didn't have to be that fine to get through because it didn't look that good if you tried to do really fine work.
Yeah.
And I think what happened, certainly this century, is the reproductions probably back at what it was back in the 60s.
Right.
So you get artists now that work in doing fabulous work.
Mm.
I mean, they're a level way above me doing painted artwork now.
Yeah.
A lot of it digitally painted as well, and it just looks gorgeous. And I think that's what's changed. I think I'd struggle getting into comics now, looking at the quality of the work that's out there.
Yeah.
Could be fantastic. I'm absolutely knocked out by it. But yeah, so
Mm.
yeah, definitely the reproduction of the artwork and the tools we've got now, working digitally, you can get
Mm.
some magnificent stuff. Because I could never find my way around an airbrush, so I was
Yeah.
doomed back then.
And probably a question you get asked quite a lot, but is there any sort of characters in comics that you'd missed out on drawing that you'd really wanted to draw?
Well, I still want to draw Spider-Man for America at some point, just to get that,
Yeah, yeah,
that ticked off. There's a few Marvel ones, and it's basically just, thinking back as a kid, which ones I'd love to do. I'd love to do Fantastic Four at some point. I'd love to do Thor.
yeah,
Doctor Strange was another one of my absolute favorites. I'd love to do that at some point. My big one was always Superman. It was, I really want to draw Superman. I really want to draw Superman. And I got offered Superman. I did a few issues and just thought, oh, okay, I've drawn Superman. And there was no like,
yeah.
that's fine. Whereas Batman, I did Batman. I thought, oh, I could do more of this.
Mm.
So maybe Batman again at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, I have got to draw on a lot of the major characters, and it might be just for one or two or three issues or a few specials and all that. But at some point, I've got to do them. So that was good
Mm.
fun.
And what are you working on at the moment? If you don't, can you say?
Well, I'm working at the moment. I'm just finished storyboarding a TV show for Netflix, which has been announced, but I can't say.
Fair enough.
It's coming up soon. I've just done volume 1 of this. The book I was telling you about, the Phoenix Project. Which
Oh yeah, yeah.
I can reach over and which is this. Ta-da-da.
Ah, okay.
Now the Phoenix Project, I didn't know anything about it, but if you work in IT, it's people in IT. It's like their version of On the Road or their Bible.
Yeah.
It's a novel, which is a novel way of telling a story.
Hmm.
It's a story about information systems, and it's a story about making offices work better. But it's
Yeah.
done as a novel, so there's protagonists, there's antagonists, there's situations, there's drama,
Right.
and the book sold millions over the years. And the guy that wrote it wanted to do it as a graphic novel, so I got brought on board to do that. So
Ah, okay.
issue 1, volume 1 is out now, and I'm working on volume 2 at the minute, which I'm finishing in the next couple of months, and then
Perfect.
volume 3 apparently in the summer.
Yeah.
So that's quite fun. It's quite nice because it's because a lot. I keep thinking describing as shirt sleeves and desks. Um, it's nice drawing people sort of in real locations, doing real stuff.
Yeah.
And because they've given me a little bit more freedom on the pages where I can do, so it's not prescribed like that Batman issue was. And I quite like doing that. And I think it's partly now coming out of doing storyboards for TV, where I've done a lot of situations where characters are just, interacting on screen, and I've got to make that look realistic. So I've sort of brought that back into my comics. So what I found all the way along is that whether I've been working in storyboarding for animation or for live action or doing comics, that each job informs on the next job.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's something I'll get from that. I think, I can use that here now. That's something I've not seen done in comics, or I've not seen done on TV.
Hmm.
I always say what's interesting is you can tell TV shows where the storyboard artists came up through comics.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like William Simpson doing Game of Thrones, there are some shots in Game of Thrones that I can just see William's drawings. I can just see exactly what William's done on that.
Hmm.
What's interesting is that William, or Andrew Wildman, I said, that was the Doctor Who storyboard artist before me. We all started on Transformers, so it's a weird little mix thing, weird connection there. But I think sometimes when you look at storyboards that have been done by people that have come up through the film industry,
Hmm.
they're always very conscious of the budget.
Right.
So they'll always sort of think, this scene has got 2 people walking down a street, and it's like, you have to close off a street, you have to hire extras, and you have to. It's gonna be like a day or 2 shooting. What if it's one guy on the phone, so we can close on him most part? We don't have to have that. Or maybe we go to the guy on the other end of the phone, so it's a guy sitting in his room, he's on the phone talking to the other guy. So again, we've cut. Whereas if you handed that to me or William or Andrew, we're starting out of space, we zoom straight in, down front of the street. So we've all been faced with things with storyboarded stuff, and they've gone, no, we're going to rein that in a bit, but we will keep this bit of it.
Right.
So because we don't think in terms of budgets, that comes in afterwards. They go, yeah, we can afford to do that, we can't afford to do that.
Right.
There's a good example on Doctor Who, funnily enough, where there's a 2-parter which featured the Dalek homeworld, and Capaldi's Doctor is sort of on there. He's been captured by Davros, and the Dalek base it gets destroyed at the end of the 2-parter. And I was wandering on the set with the director, and I was sort of pointing out these beams they had built into the set, huge set it was. I said, you know what? If this was a big budget film,
Hmm.
when everything's getting broken down, one of those beams would fall down and hit a Dalek. And she went, "Oh, that looked really nice." So, but I'm not sure we can afford to do that. She said, "Put it in the storyboards anyway." So I put it in the boards, and a couple of months later, I get a phone call off Hetty, and she says, "Can you come in this afternoon?" I said, "Is there a problem?" She said, no problem. Can you come in this afternoon? And I went onto the set. I said, "Can you stand over there?" And then action. And then this beam gets dropped, hits a Dalek. The Dalek explodes. And she went, "Oh,
Brilliant.
she went, you did that." So if I've done nothing else in my life, I've destroyed a Dalek.
You've got a really interesting life. It must be a great job just to, experience all that.
Oh, it's brilliant. I mean, I have no sort of false sort of like, it's just a job. It's fantastic. I love it every day. There's some little thrill that you think, I gotta get it. Even doing commercials. I mean, I sort of basically I mainly swear off them now, but money's good, but the timing is awful. But even doing commercials, I'll always find something in the job that I've not done before, some little trick or some little,
Yeah.
maybe a camera move or something. Oh, I've not done that in anything. I wonder if that'll work here. And so I'll just like push myself every time.
Yeah.
So even things like like I said, the Phoenix Project, where it is, there's no giant robots, there's no spaceships. It is a bunch of people in an office reacting to each other.
Mm.
But I'll find some way of making it look interesting so that you're being swept along through the story. And that for me is the joy of the job
Brilliant.
every day, just making something interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think I speak for everyone. Want to say thank you for everything.
Oh, my pleasure, absolutely. Yes, it's getting me to shut up is the problem, not getting me to talk.
Well, it's been an amazing chat. Thank you so much. It's been really interesting, Mike. Thank you.
Oh, again, my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, mate.
Cheers.
Not doing it. Never
Still
mind.
going.
Okay, we'll cut that out at the end. But thanks again, Mike. Thank you. It's been brilliant.
Oh, cheers. Thanks. I shall say to Ian, thank you for suggesting me. So
Oh,
it's been
excellent.
fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, have a nice evening, mate. Thank you.
And yourself. You're right. Cheers then. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.